Hello, welcome to the latest edition of the Tech Talk. Today's topic that we're going to talk about is our C-Series integration with UCS Manager. I want to go ahead and introduce the panel that we have today. We'll start with Robert. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Good morning. I'm Robert Novak, Gallifreyan on Twitter. I'm a Cisco champion, a blogger at rsts11.com, and a 2.5-year survivor of Cisco UCS C-Series, almost 2 years of it integrated. Glad to be here today.
And Steve McQuerry.
Hello, my name is Steve McQuerry. I'm a technical marketing engineer with Cisco. Focus on a lot of infrastructure and architecture, but over the last 3 years I've had a great deal of focus on C-Series integration with UCSM.
No, thank you both. So let's go ahead and start off and talk about some of the common use cases that we see a customer using our rack mount servers for. That'd be a question for you, Steve. We'll start off with you.
Sure. So, rack servers have some capabilities that blades don't have, just due to the form factor, right? They're larger. They typically have, a lot more spindles available. So when people need a lot of drives or various RAID configurations, when they're looking maybe for a RAID 5 and a RAID 1, or a specific PCIe card, GPU, a PCO IP accelerator, or even really, really high amounts of memory, which you may not be able to fit into a blade server, that typically drives people into the rack server space.
Yeah, so it's really about the scaling out horizontally, or sorry, in your one particular server where you can have more CPUs, more memory, and a lot more drives. So things like big data, use cases, and whatnot, and having a lot of different RAID configurations on your storage.
Yeah,
so I know that customers like Robert are using our rack servers with UCS Manager. Why would a customer want to do integration of our rack mount servers with UCSM? What are some of the advantages?
So, you personally know, Eric, and I know a lot of our customers know that UCS has the unique ability to abstract many of the common server tasks, right, through the use of our service profiles. So, for example, I can create a policy for my BIOS settings, my boot settings, my firmware management. I can create a policy to upgrade my BIOS and firmware. I can schedule this, track the maintenance through the system. I get faults alerted through the system. It gives me a consolidated view of my infrastructure, my inventory. So it really defines the server as the service profile, not necessarily the hardware. And we call the service profile abstraction, we talk a lot about mobility and statelessness. Now, when you bring the C-Series into it, when you start doing local drives, we start saying, well, now the server has state, but not necessarily, right? So if I have a C server running under, UCSM, for example, let's say I've got 8 hard drives, I'm running it as a bare metal Linux box using it as an NFS server. I've got it booting up on a pair of RAID 1s, the rest of the drives are RAID 5. There's absolutely state to that box. But because it's under UCSM, the box is defined by the service profile itself, not actually the hard drives. So I could create a new service profile. Let's say something happens in my infrastructure, in my environment. Somebody comes to me and I've got to have a virtual server immediately, but I don't have any hardware. I've got this NFS box. It's not really doing a lot. Maybe I'm using it in the lab for some reason. I go create a new service profile, new identity, new MAC address, new worldwide port name. Set up the drive. Set up the boot policy not to use the local drives. And don't mess with the configuration of the local drives. Basically, just leave them alone, but set it up to boot from SAN. Use the shared storage from SAN. I could take that service profile, apply it to that box that was running as my NFS server, bring it up, run ESX on it until I actually get the hardware, then go back, take the service profile that already exists, already has the configuration servers, or configuration, everything running from an identity standpoint, put it on the new hardware, bring my NFS server back up. So the flexibility and the capabilities of being able to do that, the infrastructure just becomes something you use with UCSM, right? It's not defining the server. And we talk about it a lot with racks, but I don't think we give it enough credit when we talk about integrating blades.
So really, the service profile is truly form factor agnostic. We can do everything we can do on a blade with a rack mount. You can do policy-driven management from, like you said, all the infrastructure configuration for the BIOS settings, boot order, the firmware versions, just like we can on a blade with a rack mount server under UCSM.
Absolutely.
No, that's great. So I think it'd be, we've talked a little bit about, the logical side, the service profiles, the pools, the policies, they react the same way. How are the C-Series servers connected physically with the UCS Manager in kind of comparison to what we support for, our blades? And what does that topology look like?
Yeah, so if you don't mind, I'd like to take some time and actually share some graphics, because this has changed a little bit over the course of us doing this. So I'm going to bring up a graphic here. You guys see this okay, I assume?
Yep, we can.
Excellent. So, when we entered into the server market, we really didn't have a rack offering. UCS came out as blade servers, and one of the things we quickly learned is our customers said, if you're going to be serious about this, you're missing a big gap in your portfolio. You don't have rack servers, and not everything runs on a blade. So we need you to build rack servers. So we started doing that. Just shortly after we announced the blades and started shipping those platforms, we started building racks. But we didn't initially make them part of UCSM, but the plan was always to do that. Our initial entry was using a standalone management controller. We call this the Cisco Integrated Management Controller, or Cisco IMC. Basically, it's a baseboard management controller with some software that we wrote on it. But as it turns out, we use the same baseboard management controller on both of our platforms. So it's as simple as changing what software is presented. Is it the software that's presented standalone to a customer, or is it a software that integrates tightly with UCSM that runs on that baseboard management controller? So in version 1.4 of UCSM, we actually said, let's pull the rack servers into UCSM. But to do this, we needed to be able to have a management connection so that the SIMC could talk to the fabric interconnects to the UCS Manager, right? And then we needed a data path connection for both the VHVAs and the VNICs. So we used a 2248 FEX, which is a fabric extender that has 1 gig copper ports, and we plugged the management ports, the LAN on motherboard management ports, into that, and then the data ports directly into the fabric interconnects. At this point, it was kind of a proof of concept. We were trying to show the capabilities that we had and see how customers would react to this. And it turns out they liked it. But with this infrastructure, there were some very big limits to the scale and very limited servers that we actually connected here.
So it really, it was just the first step into our supporting of a C-Series server. I know with later versions of UCS Manager around the 2.0 timeframe, we started supporting the 2232 FEXs. What did that topology look like, and why did we transition away from using the 2248s with version 1.4?
So absolutely. Interestingly enough, this topology that we're looking at here was only supported in versions 1.4 and 2.01. When we realized that this was something that customers did want to do, we very quickly said, all right, we need to make this look like the blade servers do. Basically, we need a couple of IOMs. We need all the servers to connect to the IOMs. So in 2.02, we replaced the previous topology where we used the 2248s for management and connected directly to the fabric interconnects for data with the 2232 PPFEX. As a matter of fact, the previous topology is deprecated. It's only supported in 1.4 and 2.01. The 2.02 moving forward, we went to this model. And this really mirrors exactly what happens inside of a blade chassis. Not a lot of people know it, but that SIMC in the blade chassis, the baseboard management controller, actually has separate wire traces to a separate network on the I/O module that's then trunked up, to the fabric interconnects, and then of course the CNAs that have connections to the fabric as well. It doesn't really matter that much in a blade because you don't see the wires, but here we have to have separate physical wiring. So the reason we did it is it's much more scalable and it's much more cost effective, because if I'm plugging things into a fabric interconnect, I'm paying a port license on a fabric interconnect, right? And I have limited number of ports on a fabric interconnect. With this topology, I can get 16 servers per FEX in dual wire mode, where 16 of the wires are going for management and 16 of the wires are connected to the data path.
Oh, great. And so this really does, like you said, mirrors what we do with our blades. And one question I know we get asked a lot around this is, I know that people say, well, can I mix and match blade chassis and things like this together? Or can I have C-Series servers integrated with like a 2232 like we're showing here in the same domain, the UCS management domain, as my blade chassis?
Yeah, that's a great question. We do get that, and absolutely, right. The limit or being able to do both racks and blades is truly what UCSM is about now. It's form factor independence. We really don't care what you manage, right? There are some physical limitations to how many servers will allow you to have in the system, and that can be a combination of racks and blades. Meaning that, we have customers who have exclusively rack servers managed under UCSM. We have customers that have exclusively blade servers, but we also have a lot of customers that have a mix of those.
No, that's a great point. I mean, it just shows the flexibility of what we have with our management paradigm with UCS Manager, where if you have use cases for blades and racks, or for both, you can we allow you to utilize both of those. Well, I know with UCS Manager version 2.2, we took took this concept and enhanced it a bit more, where we and started supporting what we call single wire in version 2.1. I think that would be great as a good transition to talk about how in version 2.1 we started supporting that connected to the FEXs.
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually call it single connect now, but it was originally known as single wire management, and this was introduced in version 2.1. So what we did here was kind of took a couple of standards and mixed them together. So with the previous version, dual wire, there's a lot of wires to connect. Inside of the blade chassis, you never see those management connections. You plug it into a slot and everything's great, but when you start to mess with a lot of wires, it gets messy. But we basically evolved that, and using the VIC-1225, which is a Cisco adapter, the VIC-1225 SFP specifically, we use a combination of the pre-standard 802.1 QBR, a technology we call VN tagging, along with the Distributed Management Task Force standard known as NCSI, or Network Controller Sideband Interface, which allows a connection between the SIMC and the actual interface to carry management traffic, right? So we use a separate VIF, or a virtual interface, on the SIMC for the management traffic, and no longer have a need for that extra management cable. So it gives us a lot more scalability. Now we can go up to 32 servers on a single FEX. So you reduce your infrastructure needs by half, as long as you're okay with the oversubscription rates of 32 to 8. That becomes an option for the customer to be able to choose what that connectivity looks like, but it also reduces the cabling, and it fits really well into our overall story of convergence, right, in a converged infrastructure.
No, this is great. I mean, it really does show this, the different options a customer has to be able to do dual wire with any adapter, correct? You can, the previous example we were showing where you separate your data plane and your management plane, that can be done with any adapter, but this particular, what we're showing with single connect to the FEX, is only done with a VIC-1225, correct?
That's correct, and actually you can continue to do dual wire with the VIC-1225 if that's what you wanted to, but every other adapter that we support in the system is dual wire, except for the VIC-1225 SFP. That is the one that's capable of single wire.
Well, I know some customers may have a use case to have a couple rack mount systems, maybe not up to 32 or 160 in their environment. I know what are some of the capabilities that a customer, if they wanted to add one or two environments, but not C-Series servers in their environments, but not incur the cost of of the FEXs, what are their options?
So that's a great question. In version 2.2, we actually introduced something called Direct Connect. So Direct Connect takes what we do in single wire management, which is allow to have a management connection, go through the same connection that our uplink for data uses, and allows us to connect directly to the Fabric Interconnect. It's almost full circle back to where we started. If you remember when we started, we connected the data path to the Fabric Interconnect, but we had to have that separate infrastructure for management. This way we can connect the data directly to the Fabric and the management. And if you've only got a need for one or two servers to be integrated, you don't incur the extra cost of the FEX, the extra space in the rack, the extra power, the extra maintenance cost, etc. It's just a direct connection. And if you wanted to migrate it later or add other servers, there's nothing that restricts us at this point from basically connecting all three types of connection within a UCS system. You could have direct connect of maybe one or two servers to the fabric. You could have dual wire management and single wire management all occurring within the same system.
So that allows you to really allows you to support all the different topologies with all the different server and adapter types that we have. So if you have some older C-Series rack mount servers, you could put those in the dual wire mode, and then some of your newer servers you may want to don't have as much network needs. They could actually be oversubscribed under a 2232, and then secondly, do direct connect for ones that you maybe need more bandwidth or something of that sort. Correct?
Exactly. Yeah. There are actually a lot of connectivity options. Obviously, we don't have time to cover them today, but if anybody's coming out to Cisco Live in San Francisco next week, I actually have a 2-hour session, BRKCOM 2010. It's on Thursday morning at 8 a.m., so, feel free to join me. I'd love to see people come out for that. No,
that's great. So let's get Robert started in the conversation here. Sorry to make you wait a few minutes, but glad that you're on. I'm curious, why are some of the reasonings that you use the rack mount servers for your deployment and in your environment?
Sure. Well, the big thing is what Steve mentioned earlier, and that's needing local storage. So when you're doing big data, you need a lot of local disk, you need a lot of options for local configuration. And we couldn't really do Hadoop with the 2 or 4 drives on a blade server. I've seen it done before. It's not a good thing, not very pretty. So we were looking for machines that would provide that 8, 12, 24 disk local storage for Hadoop and for other big data platforms. We wanted the option to use different mixes of SATA, SAS, and PCI-based flash devices for different platforms. And there's only so many cards you can add to a blade server, like 1, and that kind of limits you when you want to expand. These are the reasons that we chose rack mount over blade. They're not really the reasons that we would choose UCS over other products, but that it definitely helps push toward the rack mount options that are very valuable in the UCS environment.
So given that you could use a rack mount server either standalone or integrated with UCS Manager, what are some of the reasons that you chose to use and manage your rack mount servers in this big data Hadoop environment with UCS Manager?
Very good question. The big thing that I found was the central management option. When you're dealing with 500, 600, 700 servers or more, it gets to be a pain to go out to each of them to check your firmware versions, check your configuration information, check for hardware errors. But you can do that centrally through UCSM, and now with products like UCS Central, which sits on top of UCSM for some value on top, you can see your entire environment in one place and handle inventory, handle authentication for who has access to consoles, to configuration changes, things like that. When you've got a single, like if you're using the Cisco IMC or some of the other products out there on other platforms, people can log into any server's management console and you don't know what they're doing. If everybody's going through the UCS Manager or through the XML API for other methods, you can tell who's logging in, you can decide what they have access to see and change, if anything. And when something goes wrong, you have the potential for an audit trail so you can see what got changed and when and why your entire VMware infrastructure went offline at 3:30 in the morning. Tied in with that is the simplified troubleshooting. If I log into UCSM today, I see up to 160 servers, and if I see them all reporting the same error, I know that there might be something in common. It's not just that each server has a problem. It might be an uplink. It might be one of my PDUs is down, so I've lost half my power supplies. But if it's not something like that, I can drill down and find which servers are having problems. And I think the last thing that I would bring up is the rule-based and later pool-based profiling. You can define the kind of machines you have and how they are to be profiled based on hardware characteristics and so forth. For example, any machine that has 24 hard drives or 12 3.5s and 256 gig of RAM might be known to be a Hadoop machine. So it gets set up with the Hadoop configuration, no RAID, specific VLANs on the vNICs, and various other configurations, no SAN boot because you're booting from the local disk, things like that. And it all goes toward the model that I'm hearing sort of buzzwordy lately, is changing your servers from being treated like pets to being treated like cattle. You remove the uniqueness of each server, and you can deal with them in bulk with extreme efficiency, and that's what UCS Manager gave me as an administrator and as an architecture person.
No, so having that centralized view and inventory where we do auto inventory of all the hardware, and then creating rules to how you want to use those with like the server pool qualification policies and server pools to dynamically dump them into policies, make it easier for you to deploy because you know exactly what you're getting. You can define exactly what the server that you want. Those are great points. I'm assuming that as you've been a UCS customer for a number of years. I'm assuming that it took a little bit of a learning curve to get to this point. So it'd be fun to talk a little bit about some of the stages of how you first deployed UCS, what things you've learned, and then go and then describe a little bit about how you're doing it today from that stage. I know you first did a lot of deployments with your service profile templates, but no pools. So I think it'd be great to start there.
Okay. Well, just a quick preface to that. When we initially rolled the machines out, UCSM wasn't released for C-Series yet. So I had about 300 machines that were individually deployed, individually managed through Cisco IMC, and it was interesting. I spent about 5 months asking every couple of weeks, when do we get UCSM? When do I not have to go to every single web console? And it's kind of like if you get a really nice car, but then you take it into the shop and you get a loaner that's, doesn't have power steering or whatever, and then you get back to your car with the power steering. It's night and day, and that's kind of how I feel going to UCSM on this volume. But you're right, we did start out with service profile templates, and we could define with some advanced planning how the network and storage were configured. And we were able to do that unified. There's one Hadoop policy, there's one Vertica policy, there's one application server policy, there's one infrastructure policy. But you have to apply them individually per server when you don't have dynamic pool qualification. So that means that 300 servers, 300 Hadoop servers, you're applying a policy to each one, and it's basically pets with serial names. Or kind of like how most people do their passwords. It's like, my password is now password 125, password 126, and don't log into Google with that. So that was how we did it first, and our first couple of pods went that way. Lived with that for about a year, and ran into a problem that I think I'm going to let Steve bring up either now or a little bit later. We had some fun with protect configuration on the storage configuration, especially when we were dealing with some machines with JBOD and some machines with RAID configurations.
Yeah. So local drive configuration was not something that we really planned for with UCSM. Like I said, when we talked about it early on, it was about, when it was developed early on, it was developed for blade servers. So our blade server portfolio, it's 2 drives or 4 drives, pretty much. So there's not a lot of options there. But one of the things that we understood is people would move service profiles off, like I was talking about the example earlier where I turned the NFS machine into an ESXi server. The one thing I didn't talk about in detail that Robert's bringing up here is you have to be careful how you deal with that local data. So your local disk policy says, hey, as I associate a service profile, I'm going to go through deep discovery, I'm going to look at what's going on, I'm going to change the data structure to what the local disk policy says. So if I had a system that had, a RAID 1, and my local disk policy said RAID 5, then it's going to go, oh, well, this doesn't match, so let me completely wipe out whatever you've got on the system and put it as a RAID 5. Now, we knew that was a problem, so we have this nice little checkbox on the service profile that says protect configuration. but it's a little counterintuitive. When I'm creating a service profile, I say, oh, I want to protect this configuration, so I would check that box. That's really not what it means. What it means is, as I apply this service profile, I want you to protect the configuration that already exists on your server. So, in Robert's case, let's say they had a system that was a bunch of, RAID zeros or JBODs or whatever the case may be. If he applied a service profile that said RAID 1, but he didn't have protect configuration on, it would wipe all of that out. So that's kind of been a learning curve. As we talk to customers, we emphasize that a lot now because it's a little counterintuitive. We're making great strides with the local disk policies. More things are coming, but it's a lesson to be learned, right, Robert?
Yep, and it definitely drills in the history of the platform in a way that I only made that mistake about 4 or 5 times last week. No, actually, I finally learned. Steve told me what it meant about 5 or 6 times, and now it kind of makes sense, and I can explain it to other people.
So that's a lot of good analogies of how you first started deploying. I know that then after that first level of deployment, you didn't really use the dynamic capabilities of the qualification policies and pools. What made you move into what made you actually start looking at that, and how has that been working for you? Being able to define exactly the server that you want to be applied with that service profile.
One of the big things was that pain of having to apply 300 individual profiles. And one of the things that I still don't like about UCSM is that it's based in a certain Redwood City-based application platform and language, and it can be a pain to operate at times, but that's not a Cisco-specific thing. Everybody who uses Java has that pain. But the other thing was we got a better sense of what we were deploying and how uniquely defined it was. So we could say, here's a pool, 256 gig, 12 disks, VLAN 5000 or whatever. Make that a Hadoop profile. So then if you add, say, 100 of those machines, they match that dynamic pool qualification policy and automatically get a profile created for them and assigned. So that way, for example, if you add another 20 a week from now, once the guys in the data center plug it in, it gets discovered, it gets a profile, and it's magic. If I roll out another 1,000 machines, and I hope nobody from Cisco Sales is listening because that's just a random number. That's not an order. Roll out 1,000 machines, and I want them to all be Hadoop. I've got that policy. It would go up through UCS Central back down to UCS Manager, and I'm not assigning 1,000 policies. I'm watching them get assigned automatically. So the complication that we found in this model is that if you change the server configuration without changing the pool rules, like let's say you started out with your Hadoop machines being 128 gig each because you got a good deal on memory, and then you discover that your data warehouse people need twice as much memory. You bump it up to 256, but your policy still says 128, and it reports a failure that's not really a failure. It doesn't stop the machine from working, but it gives you a warning saying that it doesn't match the policy and it can't be applied. So if you change your political policies, I would say, or your configuration policies, you need to change them in the dynamic pool setup so that you don't get those errors, or attach them to a different dynamic pool setup like Big Hadoop and Little Hadoop, and just write Hadoop at 192 or whatever.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. So it really, again, it becomes very prescriptive on how you pick the servers. You're getting the exact server with the processor types, the amount of memory that you want, etc. One thing that makes, I think that you mentioned to me before that you found a couple servers that had some bad DIMMs in them. Like part of the association process, like, hey, I ordered X number of servers, but I'm missing 2 from that 100 servers that you were deploying. I only have 98 versus 100. So it'd be interesting to you're finding anomalies in your environment because by using these dynamic capabilities.
Yeah, definitely. So, if it can be as simple as a machine got jostled on the receiving deck, and one of the DIMMs is loose. I've had that happen hundreds of times over the years. Uh, and when they come up, they have 92 gig or 88 or 64 or whatever. They don't fit the pool qualification, so they don't get policies. And then I go and I see, well, I ordered 100 machines. There's only 96. Let me go filter my inventory and find everything that's got the other qualifications. And then I see, okay, I've got these, C240s, for example, that should be in the policy, but they only have 84 gig of RAM or 82 or 76 or whatever. And then I know that those 4 machines, I can send a data center guy out, or if I'm sitting there in the data center, I can go out, pull them out, reseat the memory, and then they come up, they discover or rediscover, and they get a policy. Likewise, if somebody, if I got some machines that had too much memory, I probably would be a little bit quiet about it, but would make sure that we didn't get billed for it, and if we did, send it back. And that way, you've got a homogeneous environment if that's what you're expecting. And
Right.
that's definitely a benefit to both to the pools and to the UCSM model, where you've got a central inventory. You can sort, you can filter, you can export. So, if you want to load your information into something that doesn't have access to the API, you can get a comma-separated file and import it into something else and do all sorts of magic there as well.
Right. This makes upgrades or adding more capacity a whole lot easier, because you really rack them, stack them, plug them in, and then UCS Manager automatically inventories all of those for you, and then you can they get thrown into the appropriate pools, and then all you have to do is to apply a profile to it, and then install your operating system after the association process is done. So it sounds like that, in your particular role, a lot of the services you guys do, it makes you kind of like a service provider for your business. How is managing your C-Series servers and or blades as well, if you have any, enabled you to make those delivery times faster for your end users in your environment?
Very good question, and it's a definite benefit. One of the things is what I usually call going away from the snowflake model. When you've got homogenized configurations, when you've got a set of specific offerings, and you're not adding a DIMM or two, adding a disk or two for people, you have a standard option to offer your customers, internal or external, however your business operates. So, we can say, you want a bare metal Hadoop server, this is the configuration we've tested. We have this many available. We can expand your cluster. We can set up a dev cluster. We can set up a proof of concept cluster for a different application, things like that. For customers who are already working with us, we can replace machines very easily without changing the configuration or IP addresses or storage configurations, just by reallocating or reassociating that service profile to a new piece of hardware, which Steve had talked about a little bit earlier. 10, 15 years ago, some of the other enterprise server manufacturers were experimenting with smart cards to hold the configuration. I don't know anybody who actually deployed them and used them the way they were designed, but what UCSM gives you is the effect of a smart card, but it's all built into the platform. You can pull that identity, put it on another machine. So, motherboard fails, memory fails, disk fails, it's all, hardware is going to fail. And if you've got some extra machines, you can just pull that profile, associate it to another machine, and it comes up and says, oh, I'm this other guy's name, dig me. So that speeds things up a lot. We can deploy new machines a lot faster with the dynamic pools, as I mentioned earlier. Roll out 100, 500, 1,000 machines, and it doesn't take individual intervention on each of them. You only have the outliers to deal with. And the other benefit, and this is something that we're still working on defining and deploying, is control of server management. You can have, when you get to a certain size, you may have one team handling one set of servers, but you don't want them to have access to another set of servers. And by doing things like the organizations or with other forms of like role-based access management, you can say this team in this LDAP group has access to all the servers, this team in this LDAP group has access to this subset, and you can also define what control they have. These guys, maybe your NOC can't change network configurations, but they can reboot a machine, they can re-acknowledge the machine. Whereas your chief javelin catcher for UCS, can change anything and break anything, and they've got a separate access control, and that's all centrally managed. It can be centrally audited, and when you have people filter in and out of your NOC, your sysadmin team, you can pull those using existing infrastructure without having to go to each machine and delete local accounts. So that management distribution is also a big thing when you're dealing with a lot of end customers and hundreds or thousands of servers. So it doesn't really improve delivery time, but it definitely improves manageability.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I've talked to a lot of customers that are, looking at, they have their storage and network teams are a total different team than their server teams, and they said, hey, we want to be able to manage and cable virtually even, cable the environment like we do with regular switches and such, and that's a good reason of why we added LAN and SAN connectivity policy, so you can segregate the server guy from role just to configure the BIOS, the boot order, and those types of things, and let your SAN and LAN guy really configure, how many NICs or HBAs they have to utilize, as well as how they're connected to their environment. So you can enable things like compliance use cases and whatnot. So, I mean, it's good comments. I mean that you bring up of how you're utilizing it.
So, Eric, I want to interject something here for a moment. You talked about the SAN and LAN guys, and there are a lot of customers where they do, right? The SAN and LAN guys specifically go out and they manage, everything down to the VNIC. There are another set of customers where they don't care, right? That's like, we'll give you the connectivity to UCS. We'll go to the fabric interconnects. We'll tell you what VLANs need to be created. We'll make sure they're upstream. Now, here's your servers. We trust you to do what you want, and that depends on the environment. But it does provide some empowerment for server admins in certain organizations. And again, that's really dependent on how the organization wants to deal with that. But all of a sudden, the server admin doesn't have to become a switch expert, right? Even though a lot of them are. It's simply part of the service profile.
Right, and then as you travel, that service profile potentially moves from one blade or rack mount to another, that identity is captured, so then it makes it really easy to, if I have a failure at 3:30 in the morning on a blade and I can't get a part right now, I can actually move it to a spare blade or a rack mount server like you said before, and I don't have to call my network and SAN guy to recable things or rezone storage or change any settings on the network side and such. So really allows that mobility and that service mobility with the service profiles.
And something else I want to bring up there that I hadn't thought of before in this context. Steve was talking about server guys being switch experts and sometimes vice versa. The way the networking in UCS works, you don't really have to deal with it on the same level. And that can be a good thing, but it can also really confuse the guys who are 100% route and switch. You're not dealing with an individual network port that is your ETH0. Everything is going over the VNICs on the single or dual connections. So you're not as worried about whether one port is up or down, shut down or no shutdown. You're just dealing with everything's cabled incorrectly, and we're controlling it through UCSM, through the FI, the Fabric Interconnect. And it's hard to communicate that to people who are used to the standard rack and stack and spaghetti cabling fun. But once you figure it out, it makes a lot more sense and reduces complexity, and it reduces spaghetti as well.
Because it allows you to logically carve out the amount of network bandwidth you want to give someone versus saying, you get 1 gig pipe or a 10 gig physical pipe or what have you, and then you may only be utilizing 5, 10, or 25% of that particular pipe.
Yep, and if you need more, if you need another VLAN, you don't need to run another cable. If you need SAN or iSCSI storage, you don't have to add another NIC. It's really liberating, and it gives you a lot of flexibility when you've deployed that upstream to just make the configurations. You may have to do a reboot for some of the configuration changes, but you don't have to have somebody open it up and put a card in and run fiber backhaul to the core switch or to the SAN switch or whatever. It's really converged.
That's awesome. I mean, so given that you've been a customer for a number of years, you've went through a fair number of firmware upgrades through the life cycle of the rack mount servers on the standalone, as well as being integrated into UCS Manager. I know we've added some capabilities to do kind of the N-1 model for the infrastructure versus the server firmware level. How has that been received from you guys, and how are you guys utilizing that?
Very good question, and it's made the upgrade process a lot smoother for us. The way that firmware works in the UCS environment is you have an infrastructure firmware model or bundle that goes on your head-end fabric interconnects and your FEXs, your I/O modules, blade chassis, etc. And then you've got host firmware, which would either go on your blade servers, you've got a bundle for that, and you've got rack mount servers or C-Series servers. And I don't know how many people watching have tried to get downtime scheduled in a one-day period for 700 servers with 20 or 30 different end user groups. I can tell you I have enough fun getting 200 or 300 at a time. So what we can do with the N-1 is we upgrade the infrastructure firmware. We get some additional features. We get the newer UCSM, and we don't have to reboot hosts. We don't have to upgrade the firmware on the hosts at that time, but we're staged for it. So, like I did some upgrades last month and some earlier this year, and the infrastructure UCSM is up to the newer version, and then I can schedule time on a one-off or a business unit by business unit basis to upgrade the host firmware to bring that up to date. And then later on down the road, I do another infrastructure upgrade, to 222 or 223 or 23 or whatever. And then I can go through scheduled maintenance windows that I can tell people about today for 6 months down the road. Say we're going to want to upgrade all of your servers sometime down the road. Let's start scheduling that. It's a lot easier than having to do the whole thing at once and having a whole bunch of business units and a whole bunch of execs upset with you. It really makes the platform serve the customers rather than the customers serve the platform. And I should trademark that.
Well, it makes things a lot better than going back to the C-Series standalone model where you had to touch everything individually. And then it makes things a little bit easier where you can actually just change the policy and then have it take effect on its next maintenance window. Either via user acknowledgement or via a schedule.
Yeah, and you don't. There may be side effects if you run at mixed levels, but not as much as if you just reboot all of your servers at once.
Right.
So, we may take 10 machines down today, 10 tomorrow, for some other reason. OS upgrades, kernel upgrades, non-Cisco component upgrades. And I can just tell the team that's doing that, hey, button, tell it to react. It'll take 20 minutes or 10 minutes or 30 minutes. And then it'll come back up with the new firmware. They haven't had to do anything because I've told the system, next time you get upgrade to this, and
I think Robert's connection we're having a little bit of a problem there, but I want to take this time right now to let you guys go ahead and ask some questions. I know we haven't had any questions from the Q&A, but if you guys have things that you are wanting to tee up or start asking, feel free to ask Q&A, and then we can provide that here as well. A couple of comments while we're waiting on for Robert to come back and get connected again is I know there's going to be a lot of great sessions. Steve, this is kind of some of this is a preview to what you're going to be talking about at your particular session. And I know that, and so I definitely would recommend people to join that, as well as for those who are wanting to learn automation and such. We have a PowerShell lab or Power Tool lab using PowerShell. on Tuesday afternoon from 1 to 5, as well as we're going to give a lot of, give a lot of presentations at our DevNet site as well. Looks like we got Robert back. So
yeah, sorry about that.
No problem. So I think a great next step to talk about is you've talked about how you're managing your servers across multiple UCS domains. So before the invention of UCS Central, you were doing those all separately. How are you guys looking to use today or in the future use UCS Central in your environment?
Well, the interesting thing about UCS Central is you don't have to roll it out and make it do everything at once. And that's something that we really like because it's hard to change everything at once. So right now we're rolling up to firmware versions that are supported with UCS Central, and we're going to use it to do inventory and baseline monitoring and so forth, but not necessarily push the profiles and configurations down from UCS Central. So initially we'll start looking at what's out there, where the differences are, and where our inventory lives. And then at some point down the road, perhaps when we do a hardware refresh or that sort of thing, we would be able to integrate top-down configuration where it's possible and keep everything consistent from domain to domain. And even if you've only got one domain, that's going to make a big difference as well because you've got a clearer, less Java-bound interface to look at things. And then when you go to add another domain, it's easy to integrate into UCS Central.
So I mean, you're really looking at doing kind of the start, look at the administrative policies, your LDAP settings, your syslog settings, all of those types of things. Start there, as well as centralizing your inventory.
Yeah.
Where you can get that one view of your entire environment, and then over time look to start taking advantage of the global policies, the global pools, and service profiles as new environments come in, or as you version your older environments, maybe upgrade the operating system or need to take an outage anyway, so move it from local to global at that point in time.
Yeah, exactly.
And Eric, if I can interject something here as well, right? We worked with Robert during of his first 3 domains, and after we created the service profiles in the first domain, one of the things we wanted to do was take those same service profiles and create them again in the second domain. Now, as you know, and some other people may know, there's we can export that information and import it. So there are ways to do it between domains. You want to make sure you don't pick, you don't export the identities like I did. But that's where UCS Central becomes very helpful. As you're deploying multiple domains, to not have to take extra steps to to be able to get those same service profiles that you're going to use over and over and over.
No, that's a great point. So how far along are you guys with Central, UCS Central today, Robert? Is it just you just starting to dip your toe in it, or is it something that you guys are just starting to plan for, or have some of it implemented?
We're starting to plan for it. We rolled this out before the firmware supported it, the released firmware. So we're still doing the firmware upgrades across our domains and across our hosts, and we're starting to evaluate. Might be the wrong word, but it's close enough. Evaluate UCS Central using what's called the UCS Platform Emulator, which is a really cool tool that lets you test a lot of the UCS functionality without putting your production infrastructure at risk. And you can point UCS Central at a clone of your configuration that doesn't actually have customers on it, that's all living in VMs on your laptop or your workstation or whatever. So that's going to be what we're doing. We've been talking with some of the guys at Cisco who are working with, who are behind UCS Central, and we'll be doing that more as time permits as far as rolling it out to actually point at the real environment.
So when you say that you're doing the clone, you're basically just pointing UCS platform emulator to your real system to clone the hardware in, as well as doing like a config all backup from your real system into UCS emulator. So then you can basically have the logical configuration as well as the physical elements in an emulated form, and then scale out that to the number of domains that you have, so you can really mimic your environment in a virtual form.
Yeah, exactly. And we can test things like what happens if I do push all of these policies down to all the machines and to all of the domains. And then I can roll it back to the latest snapshot, which is much harder to do on the physical platform.
Right, because you have to deal with customers and outages and all those types of things. In an emulator form, you're the owner of your own domain and universe. So.
Yeah, protect configuration never gets in the way in the emulator because there's no storage.
Exactly. Another curiosity that I have for you, Robert, is you guys have done a lot. UCS Manager gives you a lot of that automation capability. Are you guys using anything like scripting to help even speed up more your environment to do scripting across UCS plus other things like storage and such, or are those things you guys looking to do in the future as well?
The phrase that comes to mind is copious free time. We definitely are aware of it. I've been watching, there's a PowerShell scripting contest that's going on in the UCS community on Cisco.com, and I believe they're going to be announcing the winners of that contest at DevNet next week in San Francisco during Cisco Live. So I've been keeping an eye on what can be done. I haven't really had the time to implement any scripted integrations yet. But hopefully when we get through the round of firmware upgrades, get to the point where everything is consistent and everything is cattle, not pets, I'll be able to take a look at that, work with our DevOps team to integrate that into their monitoring, into their provisioning even. There's no reason other than really liking Java that you can't control this from a central platform that's outside of UCS. And in some environments, that might be UCS Director, but in other environments, it might be your management platform, whatever you're using to coordinate, say, your VM environment and your other bare metal. You can use to coordinate this, determine inventory. Somebody says, I need 20 new servers that are this class. You can have it pull from UCS, from the XML API, and then if it's approved, if it goes through your policies or whatever, you click a button and it goes out, applies service policies, applies vNix, and netboots and rolls the servers out. So there's definitely a lot of potential for the automation, and it's all built in. There's no added licensing for the API access, and there's a vibrant community on communities.cisco where I might have an idea. I don't know how to do it because the last time I programmed it was like Perl 0.1. And I can go out and ask people, how would you do this? Have you done this? And get help, get some advice, maybe get a script that somebody's written, and tweak it for my environment. So it's definitely a lot of power, a lot of potential, and I'm really looking forward to getting the time and energy to look into that.
Are you attending Cisco Live, Robert?
I will be there. I'm actually doing 2 labs this year. So I'll be getting up there Saturday night and staying until the final tweet up on Thursday.
Well, hopefully, maybe you can make our Tuesday night, time where we announce the winner. So if anyone that's watching wants to maybe come meet you, we're having a little party around 5:30 in the DevNet zone at Cisco Live, where drinks and the hors d'oeuvres will be provided, and we can hopefully people maybe want to talk to you and ask more questions about this directly about your experiences. That'd be awesome if you don't mind joining that.
No, I'll do my best to be there. I'll probably be in the social media hub a fair bit, and I'll be around all week. Try the veal.
Well, I don't think that there's. If anyone has any questions, please. We'll stay on the line a couple more minutes here. Please ask them directly on the Hangout on the Air event page, and feel free to ask Robert, Steve, or I some questions. Steve, do you have any closing remarks while we're waiting for questions that you want to bring up?
You kind of caught me here. I was in the middle of trying to go to the site and look at some things, but I think Robert's covered a fair bit of it. I think as we look at what we've done with C-Series integration, I will say there's a lot of really cool things on the horizon. We're going to continue to evolve this. One thing we didn't talk about from a supported connectivity standpoint is, we have customers who, sometimes want to connect to UCS on one side, but connect to network, other networks on the other side. So these are the types of things, we've worked to integrate support for within the system. Hard drives, obviously, dealing with the management and configuration is something that we're looking at how we can improve that. So it's a very powerful tool. It's really unique to the industry from what can happen. The management of the C-Series, and we've seen a lot of customer adoption. It's really kind of amazing how many people have found a need for rack servers in their environment. So it's been fun. It's been a fun thing to work on.
Any closing remarks from you, Robert? I don't think we haven't had any questions yet, so we'll probably close down here in just a minute or two.
Okay, well, as I mentioned, I've been doing the integrated side for 2 years, working very closely with Steve to get through some of the growing pains and learn a lot about the platform. And it's, I probably shouldn't say this, but I will anyway, because enough people at Cisco have heard me say this. When I first saw the machines 2.5 years ago, I thought, oh, cool, super microservers with a Cisco sticker. And, it took me a little while to see how they were different from anything else. And the more I've worked with them over the last 2.5 years, since my boss at the time said, hey, you want to go to the data center and see some new servers? And I said, yeah. I've learned a lot more about the platform. The platform has grown a lot with and around me, and it's been a really cool experience seeing this platform grow, seeing it expand in the market, and seeing it make my life as a system administrator and a hardware administrator so much easier. And it's the potential for what to do next is really big there. It's been a long time. In fact, it's been since I was dealing with Sun hardware and databases on that platform since I last thought, wow, I wonder what they're going to do next with this platform. So I'm really looking forward to growing with the platform and making even more efficient use of it through the automation, through UCS Central, through some of the partner integrations and acquisitions that Cisco's doing.
No, that's great. Again, I want to thank you, Robert, for joining this. Do you mind mentioning what your Twitter handle is again, just so people can follow you if they want to talk to you and ask more questions?
Sure. It's Gallifreyan. I've been a Doctor Who fan as long as I've been a technologist, about 30-something, several years. And you can check out my blog. I've blogged some stuff about UCS and other technology at rsts11.com. And as I mentioned earlier, I'll be at Cisco Live all week next week. Feel free to find me on Twitter, find me in the social media hub, find me in the DevNet space Tuesday afternoon, whatever.
And Steve, as well for you, what is your Twitter handle so people want to follow you and ask questions?
Sure, it's S. McQuerry, SMCQUERRY. I'm not very original at times, so it seemed really like a great idea at the time. I do want to make a comment about something Robert said. So when he says Supermicro with the Cisco logo, what he means is, oh, these look like Supermicro servers. We do not OEM our servers. We actually make our own servers. So our first generation servers looked very much like white boxes. We're well into third and fourth generation servers now. So we've learned a lot, and the platform has evolved. But just from an engineering perspective, I want to make sure everybody knows they're not OEM servers. They're our servers. We built them.
Yeah, and some custom memory management, I think, was one of the early wins as well.
Yes, with the 250, absolutely.
Well, again, my name is Eric Williams. You can follow me at my Twitter handle is AEROIC78. I'm maybe a little more original than Steve, but it's darn hard to spell. But if you forget those Twitter handles, just always go to our communities website, communities.cisco.com/UCS, and we can keep the conversation going there. Again, I want to thank Robert and Steve for joining this, and look out for their next topic coming in June. Thank you all.
Thank you.